folks, welcome back to Game Geeks. I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. For those of you who do nothing but complain about our Savage Worlds reviews, guess what? I've got two units to cement a line for you. Bite me. Today we're going to be talking about Eldritch Skies. Now, I have this in my famous printed and black coil binding that I get done at my university because it's very cheap to get paid for this type of binding. Eldritch Skies is honestly, it's almost unique of all the games that I've run into because it is a cinematic unisystem game that kind of hones you in on at least the style of game that it's going to be, but combine that with the fact that it is Lovecraftian science fiction. Now, when I say Lovecraftian, most of you probably instantly default to great squiggly horrors rising out of the ocean near some small Atlantic decaying seaboard town, and people discovering that they're half fish or half ghoul, horrible things happening, screaming madness, the whole nine yards. This author, John Sneed, takes a substantially different approach to Lovecraft than most authors do. His approach is that Lovecraft was not a horror writer. Lovecraft was a science fiction writer. Now, before you yell, heresy, hear me out for just a second here. If you think about it, almost all of what Lovecraft originally wrote were about great cosmic aliens interacting with humanity in such a way as the typified in Avengers Ant and Boot. It wasn't until August Derleth came around that these ideas of soul-draining monsters, the Elder Sign all over the place, the elder gods helping us against the outer gods, etc., that those ideas came into fruition. This game does not cotton to any of that. This holds to what Lovecraft wrote originally and expands it outward through a slight alternate history into a futuristic age of space travel, alien interaction, etc. The idea here being that a combination of Elder Thing, techno-sorcery, which is available, discounted for cheap in their abandoned city in Antarctica, combined with Yithian knowledge from Australia, allowed us to build FTL engines to get out into space, explore planets, and encounter some of these strange alien creatures that Lovecraft describes, the Mi-Go, the moon beasts, etc., and interact with them in a more science fiction-y than, my mind, gibber, sort of way. This does involve a slight, I'm not going to call it a sanity mechanic because that's not what it is. It's referred to as a hyperspatial exposure mechanic. And what it is how these alien monstrosities, Cthulhu, Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, how each of them contaminate or alter the human brain and human existence upon exposure such that you become less able to enjoin, less able to interact with humanity, and become slightly more like those creatures. How does this work for character builds? Well, sorcery is greatly modified from things that you would see in Buffy, Angel, or Ghosts of Albion. Sorcery in this is a much more Lovecraftian feel. You have certain spells which you are able to construct and utilize, and they include the Vorish Sign, the Elder Sign, Create Gate, etc. You can, if you so choose, summon such worthies as Hastur, Ithaca, and Great Cthulhu himself, Azathoth, Shub-Niggurath, although each one of them comes with it a significant hit to the hyperspatial exposure threshold that you have. Like a good sci-fi game, this gives you interesting builds for ships. This gives you a lot of qualities and drawbacks, both available as racial modifiers. So if you so chose, you could play a Deep One hybrid or a Ghoul hybrid, or someone, I imagine with creation, if you wish, you could play someone who was essentially serving as a meat puppet to the great race of Yeth while they wandered around experiencing things. And there are ways of interacting with other races, like Mi-Go, and the Mi-Go being the apex of the biological engineering rules. There are the ideas that you work for an ops team whose job is to protect and secure humanity's future in this world that dislikes them. There are psychic powers, there are cybernetic modifications, there are mystical modifications. There's a lot to chew on in this book. most of it is presented in a very easy to read, easy to understand fashion that you have the ability to interact with. Folks, if you are looking for a game that gives you Lovecraft, but from a less August Derleth, oh look, it's Dunwich, something has to be bad point of view, and promotes a science fiction-y approach. This is the wide world that we have, the wide universe that we have to interact with. There are different planets described. Hell, you can even go to the Dreamlands in here if you wanted to, which is the one piece of Lovecraft's mythology that I've never found a good way to incorporate into modern or science fiction games other than being for a Mythos Critter mass transit system. You know who you are that gave me that phrase, and I promised I wouldn't out them from the closet for that, but that was for you. Anyway, so if you want a different approach to Lovecraft, if you want cinematic unisystem in another form, since earlier forms of it are becoming more and more difficult to find, Eldritch Skies is absolutely an approach to look at and a book to acquire. Specifically, even if you're like me and you never run any game exactly as it's written, and you feel like ripping apart bits of every other Unisystem book, including this, throwing it into a blender and adding in a fifth of Ghostbusters and seeing what falls out of it, then you cannot possibly go wrong with any of these books. For Game Geeks, I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Good day and good gaming.